So thank you everybody for joining us and continuing on with the webinar PSIA-AASI chats. They've been a lot of fun. We've had a lot of them go around, and it's cool to now kind of start to do this nationally. So we have Jack Bentley joining us. He's a Western Division examiner. He works at North Star. He's going to be one of the Western Division candidates trying out for the next national team go-around. He joins us from abroad. Before he joined us here, he spent a lot of time in Australia, Canada, Austria. So he brings in a lot of good information from some of our peers across the world. Kelly Coffey, for those of you guys that don't know, national team alumni. When I met him, he was working at Breckenridge as the training manager, and he has now moved his way out west and is also on the Western Ed staff and is now the children's GM at North Star. So thank you guys for putting this on. We're looking forward to the information. And again, everybody, please feel free to use that chat option. And if you do have any questions, there is that questions tab as well. So looking forward to it. Thank you guys.
Yeah, thank you, Ryan.
Thanks, Ryan. Hey guys, how's it going? I hope everyone's doing well right now. And how you doing, Kelly? Are you all good?
Doing well, yes. It's got through homeschooling all spring. Now I'm pretty much summer camp director for my kids, trying to keep them active and outdoors and not just glued to the screens. So but slowly my roles have been evolving in this social isolation time, but healthy and everybody's just sane, so that's important.
Yeah, very cool. Kelly and I have been, for those of you that don't know, Kelly and I work together at North Star. Kelly's actually my boss, and it's been a lot of time spent the last few months over these video conferencing meetings and stuff like that. But it's been really fun, Kelly, to hang out with you over the internet and actually talk more about technical skiing. And when you brought this idea to me, talking about going in depth about the ankle and how it affects us as skiers and how to teach it, I thought it was such a good idea. Mainly because when I looked into the manuals, there is some parts in the manual that goes into what the ankle can do, but there isn't a lot. And I think that we can really deep dive into it today and answer some of those questions that you guys might have, get some myth busting going on, and give you something to take away so that you have a bit of a better understanding about a really important joint when we're skiing, and how to utilize it, how to teach it, and what to look for when you're doing your movement analysis out there on the hill. So without further ado, we've got a lot to get through. I'm going to just bust through a little bit of the flow for today. Kelly's going to kick it off with a little bit of a deep dive into the anatomy of the ankle joint. And I'm going to go into a little bit of the truths and myths busting, like I said, some of those common things that we might be using as teaching cues that may not be necessarily the best thing after we go through that anatomy course that Kelly's going to do, and we'll realize that maybe we should take a different tack to it. Then we're going to jump into some movement analysis. What for in a skier, what part of the turn is best to look for that ankle plantar flexion and dorsiflexion, and what should it look like? And then we're going to go into how to actually teach that, some good drills that Kelly and I like to use, some good cues and things like that. While I'm thinking about this and talking about the teaching element of it, you can pop down anytime in the chat function just some of your favorite drills so that we can shout them out and go into a little bit of a chat about what you like to do so that we can all participate and get something from the group. I love that when I'm clinicking, is to get everyone's opinion, because I always learn something myself when I'm clinicianing. So yeah, get some stuff out there. I want to learn something new today. And then finally, we'll open it up to you guys for a full Q&A. If there's been anything that we missed out or anything you want to go a bit more in deep with, we can definitely go there towards the end. Yeah, so without further ado, Kelly, why don't you jump into a little bit of the anatomy and how the ankle actually works?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Jack. And yes, this is a webinar focused on technical understanding. And so to really set that context of like, why do we want to know more about these types of things when we are ski instructors? And I've been doing a lot of reading during this social isolation time, and recently finished a biography on Leonardo da Vinci. So I think that was a good learning for me to really help understand, like, you know, why is it valuable to be curious about these types of things? And the biography really highlighted that Leonardo da Vinci, he was just a super curious person. Obviously, clearly very talented artist, very, very smart, but so curious about every possible thing. So any little tangential thing from his art, he would really dive into that subject. So he became, you know, really well educated, you know, educated himself on anatomy, on physics, on geometry, on botany, you know, the plants in the background. He wanted to make sure were as real as possible. But you know, with anatomy in particular, you know, he'd be dissecting human cadavers or horse cadavers and learning, you know, all the muscles in the neck, all the muscles in the face, and how that makes, you know, the mouth move and things like that, so he could be more realistic in his paintings and sculptures. And so you know, with the level of artistic talent he had, he could be a really good painter and paint a really good portrait without knowing any of that stuff. But by the fact that he knew in detail how the muscles of the lips work, he was able to paint the Mona Lisa with that enigmatic smile that made it a masterpiece. So that's the level. You know, we think of this technical understanding as the underwater part of the iceberg, whereas, you know, what we actually tell the student, you know, might be just the little bit of a tip of that knowledge. But the deeper we can go in our own knowledge on these subjects, you know, the more accurate we can become, the more, you know, focused we can get, and it actually becomes easier for us to talk simply about it in a kind of an ironic move there. So that's kind of the goal here, is us to really focus on one little narrow part of a ski instructor's technical understanding, which is a small body part, the ankle. And just to clarify, when Jack and I talk about the ankle, we're referring to a region of the body that includes the lower leg, that includes the foot, all the way out to the toes. When I say ankle joint, I'm going to be referring to something much more specific, and I'll be getting into that in just a couple of minutes there, to really tell the difference between, you know, when I say the ankle, we might be talking about, you know, the muscles of the upper foot or anything like that, or the tibia. But the ankle joint is a very specific region that does a very specific thing in there. So to begin with, and you guys can follow along at home, I'm going to just show you my ankle and what it can do. Let me.
Nice socks, Kelly.
Yes, here's my ankle, and it's a very flexible and complex joint, whereas I can lift my foot up, I can push it down, I can tilt it one side, tilt it the other, I can move it around in circles or reverse that, and I've got a lot of flexibility, and a lot of things can happen with that. And I'm sure if you're doing the same thing, you can feel that as well. Obviously, we're not in a ski boot, so there's a lot more range of motion that we have in order to do that. So to begin with, that up and down movement, you know, when we're instructing, we might call it flexing the ankle or extending the ankle. The reality is it's flexing in both directions. And the reason for that is we think of, you know, the ankle as more of an L, but it's actually more accurate to think of it as a upside down T, and where that heel is actually coming out from the other side of what the foot is in there. So as a result, you know, if you flex one side by bringing the foot up, but if you're actually flexing the other side from that other point of view by bringing the heel up in there. And so as a result, that's called plantar flexion, is when you're pushing the foot down, or, you know, increasing the distance between the upper foot and your shin. And then dorsiflexion is when you're actually decreasing that angle of the joint between your shin and your upper foot in there. So plantar flexion and dorsiflexion. I like to think of it as planting, like I'm stepping on a plant, or I'm planting my foot down. Or dorsiflexion. Dorsi is like a dorsal fin on the back of a dolphin. I think of that as the top of my foot. So I'm dorsiflexing by bringing my foot up in there. And so, that's in one plane of motion, and that's kind of what we, tend to think about, particularly when we're thinking about our own forward and aft balance from there. Other ways, very relevant to us moving our feet, is rolling our ankles from side to side. We can do that in our ski boots to a limited amount, and that's called inversion and E-Version. So inversion being, I might tell my student to roll onto the little toe side of their foot. And then E-Version, I might tell them to roll onto the big side, toe side of your foot from there. So a good rule of kind of mnemonic for myself is, I think of from kind of the point of the view of the bottom of my foot, I'm showing, by inversion, I'm showing it, tipping that bottom of my foot in like that, and E-Version, I'm tipping them out or away from each other. So, if play around with that and actually try to do it where you're actually keeping your lower leg, your knee still, and you have a pretty limited range of motion, but it is there. And here we can see, with inversion, we have about a 30 degree range of motion, and E-Version quite a bit less. When we lock it into a ski boot, obviously it's even less than that, but it's still there, and it still plays a very important part that we'll get to in a little bit. Kind of moving on to the bones. This is a good illustration of the lower leg bones, which is the tibia and the fibula, and that connects directly to the bones of the foot. And here, this is where we see the true ankle joint, and that is that one specific area where the tibia and the fibula meet with the talus, which is the highest bone of the foot, and that is acts as a hinge joint. Here's a different view of that, where the tibia and the fibula kind of create this little cradle, these little brackets for the talus to fit into. And all that does is plantar flex and dorsiflex. That's all that joint does, is acts as a hinge joint, just like the knee joint is. None of the other movements of the ankle are coming from that specific joint in there. So that's an important part to recognize. Where those movements are coming from is the subtalar joint. So it's right below the talus bone with the other joints or bones of the foot meet in there. So that's where more the inversion, E-Version is coming from at that point. So it's kind of two joints stacked on top of each other to help create these more complex movements. Now we'll kind of go in. This is a great view of all the bones of the foot, and there's a lot of them. We break them up into three categories. Those three words at the bottom. So we have the tarsals, and so the tarsals are more kind of the blocky bones. The metatarsals are more the midfoot, those kind of long bones, and then the phalanges are your toes from there. So each of these bones has joints in between them. Some of them move quite a bit, some of them, not so much, but you can see how much stuff there's there that can help make these movements. So it's not one single joint that's creating this movement. It's a lot of joints working together to make that happen. So we have about 7 of the tarsals. The talus is kind of the main one. I had already mentioned the calcaneus is a big your heel bone, as you can see, and then these smaller ones that are kind of helping with that flexibility of the foot. So why not just have one single bone in the foot? That would be a lot easier to try to memorize when you're trying to take an anatomy exam. But the reason we have so many of these joints, about 26 of them in the foot, is because of all the complicated movements that the foot can do. So that's going to allow us to run and jump and move side to side and do all the stuff we want to do in all of our sports, particularly skiing there. Nice. So regarding that, again, these is a very anatomically complicated region of the body, but it plays such a key role in our ability to ski. That, you know, even though we're locking it into a ski boot and reducing the range of motion that the ankle can do, it still is essential to what we're trying to accomplish when we're trying to make our body movements to get the skis to do the stuff we want to do from there. So, you know, Jack, wanted to kind of give it back to you regarding, you know, thinking about taking that to our 5 fundamentals, or particularly, you know, the 2 we want to focus on, you know, what are the truths for skiing in regards to the ankle?
Yeah. Just quickly, Callie, once you started to explain the ankle joint as being more like an upside down T shape rather than an L shape, that blew my mind in terms of understanding how that ankle joint works a bit more. And we're not flexing and extending anymore. It's planiflex and dorsiflex, and that really opened up a little bit of a spark in my brain to understanding it a bit better. And yeah, obviously, like in the ski boot, it's more limited, right? We've all seen and felt that, and we have some movement, tipping and fore and aft in the boot, but it's not going to be too much. However, it can really affect a couple of things that we're going to go into now. And I want to start on the truth of one of our key fundamentals, directing pressure along the length of the ski, and how the ankle joint can really help play a part in that. For me personally, higher end skiing, when I'm skiing moguls, or if I'm in a race course, or if I want to ski some dynamic turns, one of the ways that I get some strong dorsiflexion going, and I'm thinking about doing this, by the way, guys, at the initiation part of the turn, is I like to try and feel like I'm lifting my foot up so that the pads and the balls of my feet are moving up towards the shin. That way, I'm using some muscular tension to engage that ankle joint. So what that does is it allows you to have a little bit of reaction to any unexpected terrain changes or anything that comes up while you're skiing. It gives you a stronger platform to stand on. It also engages those muscles so that we can be able to, which I will go into a bit more in depth in a minute, is have more of a closed kinetic chain rather than an open kinetic chain. And we're skiing from the snow up, because obviously the ankle joint is the first joint that we touch with from the snow. So pulling my toes up is a good cue for me. Even better is trying to pull my whole foot up in the boot. What I'm going to feel there, and you guys try it right now, is hold that foot up for about 10 to 20 seconds and you'll start to dorsiflex. What you'll find is you'll start to have some muscular fatigue going on. That's a good thing. The front of the shin there, the shin muscle, the tibialis anterior, that's that muscle. It's a small muscle. And then there's some muscles in and around that ankle joint there and some ligaments there that are going to help. So I'm starting to feel it aching now, I'm going to let it go. But that's kind of my sensation and the cue for me to make sure I've got some functional tension and some good ankle flex to direct pressure towards the tip of the ski at the start of the turn. Kelly, do you try and do that, or do you have some other stuff as well that we can use for less dynamic skiing, or to get the point across to our guests a bit more easily?
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, over my career, I tended to kind of prioritize different cues that would, you know, teaching my students what to do, like, hey, you know, pressure the shins against your tongue of your boots, or, you know, lift up your toes, or things like that. And, you know, lately for myself in particular, it's that combination of the two, like, you know, like you said, making sure that the foot feels like it's being lifted up while the shin is actually moving forward as well, and actually feeling like I'm gripping that instep of my boot, you know, pretty strongly. And what you had brought up there is just that creates that functional tension in the ankle, which is really necessary for that performance skiing. If I hit an unexpected bump, if I have that functional tension in the ankle, I'm more likely to keep myself in balance. However, what you brought up, pretty small muscles in the shin, pretty small muscles in the foot. Comparison to look back at your calf and how big that is. So, and just in the 10 seconds that you had me lifting up my foot just now, definitely feeling that exhaustion coming in. So, is that something that I can teach a student, an intermediate student who wants to be able to ski, efficiently all day long? Probably not. So, thinking about that a more efficient way would be just that, focusing on kind of levering the shin forward against the tongue of boot. Those types of focuses there, and that's where kind of I'm moving the knees and hips and allowing myself to use more leverage to get that ankle joint to close, but I might not have the functional tension as a result. So it's kind of that trade-off. Maybe if I'm in a Cert 3 exam about to do wedge Christies, I'm focused on functional ankle tension through that series of turns while the examiner is watching me. But yeah, if I'm cruising along on a groomed run, doing basic parallel turns, trying to help my student become much more efficient and last all day, maybe not. Maybe we're just we're still trying to keep that ankle joint closed, but kind of using kind of more efficient ways to do that. And lastly, thinking about what about kids? Younger kids, even a 7-year-old might not be fully aware of their ankle, particularly the kinesthetic feelings, sensations that are happening inside their ski boot. It's pretty far away from their brain, and that's the kind of the last place we're developing to be able to make those very precise movements, and to have that kinesthetic connection from what's going on down there to our brains. So lifting up my foot, 6-7-year-old might not really be able to understand how to do that very well, but push your knee forward, push your shin forward, would be a little bit higher up in the leg. They might have that better ability to make that happen in order to close that joint.
Yeah, I also think when we're starting to move the center of mass to fix the balance of the base of support, the center of mass is a big thing to move, right? And it's not as accurate as moving that base of support in micro adjustments, so that we can be more accurate and make that more dynamic, precise movement in high-end skiing. So like you said, for that intermediate beginner level, I think it's a great thing to talk about the center of mass and how it can get that shin to touch the front of the boot and get some dorsiflexing going, right? Should we jump on to the next fundamental that we want to talk about, Callie?
Yeah, absolutely.
Sweet. I'm going to talk about the fundamental of tipping the skis through a blend of inclination and angulation from the point of view of the ankle joint specifically. Callie's going to jump into a little bit more again about how the center of mass is involved in that as well, and some different cues. So with regards to the tipping of the skis through the ankle joint, like I said before, the ankle joint is the closest joint to the snow. We want to start to think from that point first of all, and it sets off this kinetic chain of events where when we're skiing, ideally we can tip the skis through a combination of that inclination and angulation, depending on the speed. Here, like Darren Rolves here is able to go at a really high speed. He's using a lot of ankle, knee, and hip flex in that turn just because of the forces involved. We might be doing different types of turns. Could be a wedge Christie, could be mogul skiing, could be anything, and we have to adapt the speed and the desired outcome. So with regards to any of those turns, though, I always like to think of the angulation part of the tipping of the skis, starting from that ankle joint. And pure and simple, because if we do that, then we're starting from a closed kinetic chain. Now, what that means in simple terms is we're doing something similar to like a push-up or a squat, where the movement that we're making, it comes from the first joint is the joint that's connected to the static ground, or it could be something like a barbell or something like that. So the snow for us is our solid platform to actually balance and move from, and that is a good thing. So if you think about when we're teaching skiing, you know, what we don't like to see is movements coming from the shoulders and the upper body. So a tip from the start from the upper body, or a roll of the shoulders, right? And the reason why that isn't effective in skiing is simply because this is an open kinetic chain. The shoulders are not connected to anything stable, which means we're making big gross movements, and then they're not accurate. And we're not using strong muscles to do that. Actually, we're using smaller muscles in the back, and it's not as efficient. So using the ankle joint to start the tipping of the ski at the start of the turn allows you to engage that tibialis anterior that I spoke of, the shin muscle, the calf. Then it goes up the kinetic chain through to the glutes, the quads, and the glute max, and then the back, and all the back muscles start to engage. So it's really important that we start from the ankle joint, just so that we can get that tension there, the muscles from the foot, from the ankle joint, then allow the other muscles to engage. Big muscles get involved, they're more accurate movements, and that is, for me, good skiing. The thing as well that if we look at Darren Rouse here, he's not just setting up that tipping with the ankle at the start of the turn and setting that edge. He's going to start with that, and then as he goes through the turn, he's going to make those micro adjustments through a combination of inversion and E-version. As the terrain changes, as his turn and the forces change within the turn, he's going to be able to roll on and off of that ankle joint to be able to keep the whole tip of the ski biting throughout the whole turn. So, you know, when you're skiing, think about that. Think about being in that boot with your mind, tipping from there first, and then moving the knee and then the hip into the turn, so that we're skiing from a closed kinetic chain.
Yeah, I like your point of rolling the ankles throughout the turn, making those micro adjustments. Yeah, I like to you know, share that with my students by having them just, you know, we're on the hill in our skis but not moving, and lifting one ski off, and so I'm just balanced on one single edge of one ski and trying to maintain balance there. And I can feel, you know, my foot rolling back and forth to maintain that balance, and that's a key movement for balance, you know, in skiing and in everything for us. That's what, you know, the foot does. So, but to allow that to happen, we actually need our center of mass over our base of support to do that. If you think about, you know, if you're skiing a little bit to the inside, a little bit back, your base of support is away, you know, is not directly over your feet anymore, and therefore you've actually lost a lot of that, you know, what's left of that range of motion in there. You got to get over your base of support. And when I say that, I don't mean from the gravitational line. As you can see, Darren Rawls's hips, or his center of mass, is not gravitationally over his feet, but as far as the forces of the turn, it absolutely is in there, and he can get that range of motion in his legs. So regardless of what happens in the terrain coming up, he's in a very good position to maintain that balance because his feet can do that. So we have absolutely, yes, what Jack you just talked about was start with the ankles, work your way up the body, and at the same time, we need that center mass moving into the new turn so that it can stay over the feet to allow that tipping to happen, beginning at the ankles in there. If I'm not there, if I'm to the inside of my turn at the end of the turn, I have to start my new turn by tipping something else because I don't have that movement available to me by rolling my ankles in there. So again, finish the turn really well, allows you to start the next turn really well from there.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah, and so again, we kind of wanted to hang our hat on those two truths about the ankle, specifically in our fundamentals, the directing pressure along the length of the ski fundamental, as well as the tipping using angulation and inculation fundamental. But yeah, let's go into, Jack, you and I have heard things over the years, whether we've taught them ourselves in our early careers or heard them from other instructors or assumptions from other students. But there's, definitely some myths out there about how we should be using our ankles in skiing. So kind of starting off with, one I've, heard quite a bit is stay on the balls of your feet. Now, why is that not necessarily appropriate for us?
Yeah, I actually heard this a lot as well in Austria. They like to use this as a cue at the start of the turn to get forward towards the tip of the ski with the center of mass. Yes, it will allow you potentially to get that center of mass a bit forward, and it might not, as we'll go into. So in most sports, we like to think of being on the balls of our feet as the most agile position. You think of sports such as tennis, where a lot of the time, if you're playing tennis, you're on the balls of your feet because you need to change direction quickly depending on returning that ball. Now, that is good for tennis, but if you think about it, when they're going to strike the ball, then they're going towards their back foot. They're engaging the whole foot, especially around the heel area, because that is a strong part of the foot, and that's where we can get power from. So the back half of the arch is really the strongest position. And when you think about that, if you're doing a squat, and I know Kelly likes to get in the gym and do lots of squats, and definitely right, Kelly, when you're doing a squat, you're focusing when you're trying to come out and stand tall with that weight, that heavy weight on your shoulders, you're definitely thinking about extending from that calcaneus area to have the most power and engage all those muscles, like that closed kinetic chain I spoke about earlier, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And so we've got kind of these like two different zones of the foot, and like I'm thinking about like the true bottom of my foot and kind of where that pressure point is in relation to that. And yeah, to your point, go to the balls of your feet. I'm my most agile when I'm playing tennis or a soccer goalie. I'm on the balls of my feet so I can go any direction. But I also literally have my heels off the ground in that position, which is not something we can do when we're locked into our ski boot, locked into a binding. So fundamentally, we're making different movements because of the equipment we're in. And in that other point, yeah, I'm my strongest. I am most stacked actually closer to my heel. So I like your squat analogy. This photo here is of me sliding a single barrel rail, and I like to use it as a illustration because I'm balanced on a very, very narrow thing. So clearly this has to be the point where I'm most balanced in order to not fall off one end of the rail or the other in there. And you can see that single barrel rail is lined up in the back half of my arch. So yeah, if I'm thinking about where do I want to feel the pressure on the bottom of my foot, probably somewhere along my arch in there. I don't want to get too far forward because yeah, I might be doing something else that actually inhibits that, or clearly I don't want to be literally on my heels or more on my tailpiece, because that's going to pressure the tails more so than the tips. And it's funny for me, my own personal cues in skiing for much of my career, kinesthetically, I really didn't focus much on the feelings inside my boot. It didn't connect for me the way, if a trainer would tell me like, hey, focus on where the pressure is on the bottom of your foot, that wasn't what was really connecting with me. And definitely finding, for myself, more the kind of the outcome based, like, all right, what do I need to do to pressure the tip of the ski at the start of the turn? I could, make that connection in my head a lot better. But actually, the last few years, I've actually forced myself to start thinking of those kinesthetic sensations inside my boot much more. And I found, that has actually helped me, quite a bit. Like, I guess taking my own understanding from, and hitting it from a slightly different angle, working on a different learning style, and taking me out of my comfort zone to make changes in my own scheme from there. So what I do like to do is to think about, again, that, where is the pressure along the bottom of my foot as I'm making my turns going down the hill. Now, it's still not a natural thing for me. It's I have to like stop, force myself to focus that, and then do the skiing, and then I can kind of think about it. So it's still a little clunky, but I think over time that's helping me make it more natural. Nice.
So we can say that being, sorry, Kelly, I cut you off there. We could say that we're balanced along the front of the arch to the back of the arch as being a good place, right? And being on the balls of the feet is probably a little bit too far forward, because like that picture of the ballerina in full planiflexion, that tends to put you in that planiflex position. If we try and be on the balls of the feet, I can't do that on my toes, obviously. But the nearest I'm going to get is balls of the feet. And then, as we know, planiflexion in skiing is related more to being on the tails or center to tail of the ski, putting us in more of a backseat position, not where we want to be at the start of the turn when we're trying to engage the tip of the ski. I was thinking a little bit today when I was riding my bike. When I'm riding my bike, I try and keep the pedals flat, right? And I'm not a good cyclist by any means, but one of those ideas of keeping that the pedals flat meant that I had to have that ankle in a flex position the whole time, but mainly thinking about keeping most of that balance through the center of the arch there. And similar thing when I'm skiing, and that's kind of a good analogy for me that I came away with today whilst being on the bike. What about more flex the ankles more? I've heard that a lot. Keep flexing, Callie. You can't do enough ankle flex.
Yeah, if a little bit of ankle flex is good, then more must be better. But yeah, so is there too much ankle flex? Like, is there possible to go too far in there? And well, the answer is yes, there is. And one of the pieces is, even you might get your center mass too far forward. That's happens far less than too far back. But over pressuring the tips of your skis, and therefore the tails of the skis no longer engage and might wash out at the end of the turn. The other piece of it is, if my ankle is so flexed, again, I lose that range of motion on the inversion E-version plane in there. So backing it off just a little bit allows me to get much more range of motion in my foot, in that inversion E-version plane.
I also think that when we're flexing the ankle joint, like I said before, we're thinking about doing it actively, either it's with the center of mass, right, or whether it's through that functional tension around the ankle joint itself. We're trying to do that in the initiation part of the turn. And then what's going to happen is, as the skis start to bend throughout the turn and forces start to grow within the turn, especially towards the shaping and completion part of the turn, then the snow is going to push back up to my ankle joint and then start to flex, or dorsiflex, right, to be precise, create some dorsiflexion there and flex that ski boot. More importantly, creating just enough ankle flex for the turn, the speed, the terrain, my intention. If we start to think about having to flex at the start, the shaping and the completion part of the turn, then we end up with this picture that we see of an overflexed ankle at the end of the turn, and that creates that displacement of the outside ski where you might see a little wedge at the end of the turn. And we see that a lot as examiners from the level 1 to level 2 stage, where the cues from a lot of candidates, they keep thinking that they need to get further forward, they need to flex their ankle, and they might not have a stiff enough boot as well, as they've increased their skiing ability. And then they keep trying to flex that ankle, or dorsiflex that ankle throughout the turn, and then they end up over-flexing, over-dorsiflexing, and yeah, it just leads for lack of ski snow contact from basically the middle of the ski to the end of the ski, and that is not ideal as well. So yeah, definitely not more betterer.
Okay.
So yeah, I mean, is there anything else, Kelly, on that?
Not on that specifically, but kind of transitioning on to, well, you know, we've spent from the beginning until now talking about what we should do and what we want our students to do. But want to kind of spend a little time talking about how do we see it? And kind of, let me kind of make a little preamble here. It's an ankle, you know, a flexed ankle versus an ankle that's too open. It's pretty subtle in comparison to other things that will catch my eye. Big arm movements, rotating the shoulders, even overflexing the knees. Those are the types of things that my eye catches naturally. But you know, Jack, you pointed out the ankles. That's the bottom, the start of the kinesthetic chain in our turn. So definitely the crucial thing that's happening, and so often the root cause of a lot of these other movements, ineffective movements that are happening. So how do we as instructors set ourselves up in order to best see what's actually happening in the ankles of our students?
I think as well, a good caveat with when we're adjusting people's ankle flex is just look at their equipment. Most of our guests come in and they don't have adequate cuff tension, the buckles are not tight enough around their shin and their calf, which then means that it's very difficult for them to accurately dorsiflex. So yeah, Kelly, let's go to those mogul skiers and we can look at those guys. And you know, when we're doing movement analysis on the hill, is a very easy part of the turn that we can see a silhouette of the skier going across the mountain, and that's the completion part of the turn, or you know, that initiation, the transition between old and new turn is a good place. But definitely looking at the completion part of the turn is a place where I take a snapshot of the whole body, and I can also see whether there's good ski snow contact as well, whether the tip of the ski is engaging in the snow. And another good position where you can see it is when you stand by the side of the hill and then the skier skis past you. Again, you can take that snapshot and look for that complementary joint flex with the ankle, knee, and the hip, but definitely looking at that ankle joint specifically. If we look at the two mogul skiers here, the top one is in a all flex position with the ankle, knee, and hip. However, it's an athletic stance. You can see that there is good ski snow contact. They're coming off the end of the bump there with good snow spray, and you can just see that there is a lot of visuals in terms of the other joints or the other parts of the body that gives it away that the ankle joint is working. So if you can't necessarily see across the hill or going past you, you can see that, oh, I can see the chest is, for the majority of that, is in plain sight. I can see the Olympic logo. I can also see that most of the thigh, and that's a good giveaway to say that, hey, you know, that potentially gives away that the ankle is adequately flexed. If we look at the skier below, she here doesn't have great ski snow contact. There isn't much snow spray. Arms are forward just to stay upright, right? She's in a recovery position with those arms and the poles. I cannot see, if she was skiing directly down towards me, I wouldn't be able to see any of those thigh muscles, and also the chest. I wouldn't be able to see that Olympic logo, be super limited. So those are a few cues that I like to use when I'm doing movement analysis on the hill. How about yourself, Kelly? Is there any golden nuggets that you've learned over the years that you take with you?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's that, what you hit on, that those multiple points of view. So for me, the instructor doing movement analysis on my student, in a real life lesson, I'm going to give myself plenty of opportunities to see my student from different angles. So I like that. Particularly, I'm going to make sure that they're going to ski past me as I'm standing still, so I can get that side profile. So it looks like, that to me, that's, the best picture I can see of where the ankle should be flexed in there. I might even, other routes, like I might ski behind my student, particularly if I'm not quite sure, like I can tell something's not quite right in their movements, but I can't quite make that connection in my brain. I might ski behind them and actually mimic their movements. And that might lead me back down to the ankle, like, oh yeah, if I'm skiing like that, my ankle must be open. Make that happen. But yeah, let's look at Darren Rolfs here. So really, this is not the ideal picture to see Darren Rolfs' ankle flex.
Right.
The angle isn't that great for that particular thing. And yet, you already touched on these kind of more indirect clues that allow us to lead to that conclusion of, yeah, his ankles are pretty nicely flexed. One being the skis. How do they look? Right now, the tips of the skis are definitely getting bent. You can see how the snow spray is coming off. That's looking very, very solid in there. And then, otherwise, I could see, the 13 on his bib there and his thighs. I can see that as well. So, it looks like his ankles, his knees, his hips are proportionally flexed in order for him to be where he needs to be. And then lastly, this kind of a, maybe more general picture of balance, right? He looks very well balanced right there. We could, have a picture of somebody else, and you can kind of imagine in your head what would look like not quite balanced. And so it's those clues that, like, yeah, that's probably some pretty good ankle flex, appropriate ankle flex going on, even though I can't quite see that directly. Now, in a real life lesson, I might take that snapshot or that run and then try to confirm it with some of those other views we were just talking about.
Yeah, I think, guys, just look at good skiing a lot of the time, and then you'll get that mental image of what the correct position is. I think that's a good starting point as well for movement analysis. It's not an exact science, but the more practice you get watching these videos while you've got some time is a really good thing. And then there's always the cheat. I call it the cheat, where you just basically ask the guests, hey, are you feeling the front of your boot at the start of the turn or not? You just ask them is also not a bad thing if you're really stuck. So how do we teach this though, Callie? We've gone into the anatomy, we've gone into the truths and our fundamentals there. With movement analysis, our guests. So how do we make them better at ankle flexion?
Yeah, absolutely. And there are tons and tons of drills. And I want to actually encourage everybody in the audience, if you have some favorite drills, activities or games that you like to use to help teach proper ankle flexion, yeah, throw that in the chat, and we might have Ryan call out a few of those as we're talking in there. But yeah, kind of for me, starting off in kids' world, again, I like, particularly with kids, is that focus on, feeling that pressure on the shin against the tongue of the boot. So fun things to do, I can tell them to imagine having a gummy bear or a marshmallow, right there at the top of the tongue of their boot, so they have to squish that. For years I used to, just do that in imaginary style, and then somebody actually said, no, I literally do that. I take a gummy bear, stick them in the front of their boots, and tell them they gotta, squish it as hard as possible all throughout the turn in there. The adult version of that would be having a dollar bill kind of halfway in, hanging out, and they have to keep it in there. And if they get back, the dollar bill kind of floats away. And depending on,
to be a 20, Callie.
Yeah, the wealth of your guests, it might have to be a 20 or $100 dollar bill until they actually decide they want to hold on to it for the whole run. So yeah, again, that can be kind of in a stationary mode, and then you could kind of take that into traverses or into actual skiing. But Jack, what's one that you like?
My favorite, this is definitely talking about plantar flexion and dorsiflexion, so that mainly highlighting the pressure along the length of the ski, is I like to get the guests, take my skis off, and I like to give their ski tips a shake. So I just shake them back and forth. And we can do this at any level. You can just increase the difficulty of the task by doing a couple of things. So when we do it first for a very basic guest, we can just slowly move their ski tips back and forth and get them to feel their center of mass and their ankle open and close as you move them, and then say, hey, now this time I want you to feel that balance in the middle of the foot along the arch there, feel that shin contact in the front of the boot, maybe feel those muscles engage, and see if you can stay in an athletic stance while I shake your ski tips back and forth. So the intermediate version is a similar thing, but you could do both skis independent of one another. So you do one left, the left one forward and the right one back. And it's a little bit more difficult because then there's two things going on at once that are different. And then the more advanced one I like to do for level 3 clinics and for the race kids is I get them to close their eyes because then they lose all sense of where they are and they can't see you and they can't anticipate, more importantly. So they have to really be engaged in that ankle joint so that they don't get thrown off of balance. And then one that I was thinking of, we've got, Kelly, we've got the two ones here talking about along the length of the ski balance, their pressure along the length of the ski. I was thinking I'd go off piste a little bit and talk about the tipping through inclination and angulation and through the ankle joint specifically. And it's a simple traverse I like to do, and get the guest to do a traverse on the edges and then get them to roll the skis, and then they start to side slip, and then you're going to roll the skis back up onto their edges just through the ankle joint. If they try and use any other joint that's further away from the snow at such a slow speed, they're going to lose balance and they're going to move their balance towards the inside of the turn, and the skis won't grip once they start to roll it back up onto edge. So those are two that I like to really go into. You can use them at all levels. Have you got any more, Kelly?
Yeah, kind of going back to that fore and aft version, particularly with maintaining functional tension in that ankle. I like a variation of outside ski turns, where again, this might be in that kind of basic parallel line or and tempo, but lifting up that inside ski, through the shape and phase of the turn. But there's a lot of things you can do with that inside ski, and for our particular purpose here, maintain that functional tension of the ankle flex, making sure that ski tip is up by route of proper ankle flexion in there. So that actually forces that functional tension in that inside leg, which then translates also to that ankle flex in that outside leg as well. Now, there's a bad way to have that ski tip up, which is the lean back, and we see that with people who are new at outside ski turns. But I guess that's part of your job as the ski instructor to be able to see the difference and make that correction. We want them center mass over their feet. We want that inside ski up, but we want that ski tip up because the ankle is flexed, and they can really, they're moving, they're making turns, but they can really feel that functional tension in their ankles from there. Ryan, do we have any great examples from the audience?
Yeah, there's a couple of cues, people talking about light toes, kind of like Jack, how you were talking about maybe like pulling the toes up. Some people like to talk about how just keeping the toes light so that we don't move too far forward. Someone mentioned stork turns. An extension to the drill, Kelly, with the gummy bears is with kids putting your fingers in the boots and then having them, squish you there. And then another one just came in was while on the chairlift, so that your feet are hanging, have people pull the toes up or flex the ankles and then try to open the ankles on the chair, since, you know, I mean, we're kind of isolated in those situations anyways. So like it's easy to kind of isolate that joint there.
Yeah, I love that last one because it's hard. You know, the skis are just, you know, hanging down, and so to actually pull up the ski tips in the chairlift, yeah, really engages those muscles. And because the student is just sitting there, they're able to focus just on that and get those sensations that you can hopefully then translate to when they're actually skiing.
And then John just posted javelins drawing a line with inside ski. Yeah,
Nice.
I mean,
so javelin being that kind of picking up the inside ski, but then twisting it over the outside ski while you're making that turn.
it's hard to move backwards. That was the point he just made. If you shift back, you're not going to be able to be successful with that.
Right.
Yeah, I think that's what we've got. And then somebody did mention that similar concepts to a 2016 article on Train Your Focus Close to the Snow by Ellen Post Foster. So if people are looking for some more reading or different reading on this, similar.
Awesome. I think going back to the balls of the feet or lifting the toes up, right? That's a really good quick cue for your guest that you're going to get instant feedback. They're going to be like, oh yeah, that works really well, and you're going to feel the shins in more contact to the front of the boot. And I did that for a very long time until I really got into being able to do it intrinsically without moving the feet, the toes up to the top of the boot. And I want to have my toes, especially my big toe, right, on the bottom of the ground, because that's going to be a good balance point as well. So it's a good place to start, but don't forget, let's train it out. If you're going to train it in, it can also lead to some other bad habits. But if you know you're going along that route with a guest, it's a great instant hit. And then I was just also thinking, you know, this is a very technical talk, right? But we also want to drive intrinsic motivation for our students. That's at the PSIA, our core of how we get people back, how we get people to love the sport. And, you know, let's also make sure that we're talking to our guests and asking them, you know, why they're here, what the goal is for the day, and what, you know, one of their main things about skiing is. And, you know, maybe it might be, I want to ski for the whole day without getting super tired. So then you can bring in the ankle joint, right? And you can start to say, hey, if we do this, you're going to have less fatigue. Or, you know, I want to ski more areas. So, hey, if we have a functional tension in the ankle joint, then we're going to be able to get down those moguls or those cruddy runs that you've always avoided. But sometimes we can't avoid them due to the time of day and time of year. So you build in that intrinsic motivation with whatever you do, guys.
Nice. Yeah. So we've thrown out a lot of stuff there during this time, but yeah, just kind of want to hang our hats on a few key takeaways to make sure you know, we're highlighting the stuff that we want to really make sure are sticking in your heads as a result of hanging out with us in this webinar. But that, you know, that first piece, you know, Jack really did a great job of illustrating that, you know, the ankle is the closest thing to the skis. We got to get the skis to move. So let's start there and work our way up from that. And as a result, you know, that's going to be often, so the ankle will be the root cause of other body movement inefficiencies in many of those situations. So, you know, if we kind of go back and look at those two mogul skiers, you know, particularly that one on the bottom, you know, maybe I'm, you know, kind of what I see is she's, you know, her spine is kind of flexed way too far forward and her arms are really reaching out. Now, clearly that's a result of the open ankle. You know, she had to make that recovery move. If she had closed her ankle, it would have been in a much similar position as Tess Johnson, the skier right above her there. You know, another great example, you know, I've you know, had with a student is kind of noticing that her leg steering wasn't that efficient. She was kind of getting the shoulder more involved at the start of the turn in there. And that's where I wanted to go, But I stopped myself and focused on, all right, what, let's get the whole picture here, what's happening at the ankle, and recognizing that, because, the ankle wasn't flexed enough, her center of mass was more on her heels, and that prevented her from having accurate leg steering. As a result, the shoulder had to get involved in there. So by spending most of the lesson focused on, let's work on flexing the ankles to get your center of mass over your feet, then the leg steering that she knew that she was the right thing for her to do, she just couldn't get herself to do it, started to come more naturally by focusing on that more root cause in there. That kind of takes me to the next piece. It's always worth looking at, what the student's ankle is doing. And so again, so much easier to see other weird things happening in the body, but being disciplined and, each lesson that you teach, focusing on what's going on in the ankle so that you're not missing anything from there. And then, that last piece, as Jack had mentioned, of, how he likes to focus on his ankle with skiing, is maintaining that functional tension in the ankle, not just levering that shin forward, even though, both those results would, result in the same angle of the ankle, maintaining that functional tension is key to performance skiing. If we don't have that, just being forward isn't going to cut it when we're in bumps and crud and other things that are going to try to throw us off balance there. And then kind of lastly, before we go into the question and answer section, Ryan, you mentioned Ellen's article, which is awesome. Speaking of, she was a key author in the Alpine Technical Manual as well. And, this is where we got, definitely there's some good information on the ankle in this, as well as all the other body parts and everything else. So highly encourage you guys to kind of relook at the Alpine Technical Manual. Great time this summer to keep your brains fresh with that.
Awesome. We ready for some Q&A?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great job, guys. Thank you for that. We did get a handful of questions throughout this, and Kelly, you actually answered one in your wrap up. Was how does tipping of the ankle play in the role of rotation? Is there anything you want to add to that, or?
So, well, I mentioned kind of flexing the ankle so that, fore and aft wise, our center of mass is correct, which, as I mentioned, will then allow independent leg steering to happen because we're in the right position. The same thing will happen with, tipping from the ankle. If I'm not, correctly tipping from the ankle, or if I'm getting my center of mass, too far inside at the end of the turn, I'm going to have to use something else. So, in general, if you think whether it's the edge control skill or the rotation control skill, we need to have our center mass in the right place in order for those to, those more effective movements to happen, which are going to happen from the lower body. So from the ankles, on the tipping side, from the femurs rotating in the hips on the rotational side, and yeah, absolutely, those will inhibit each other if they're not, performed correctly.
So kind of in the same realm, we're in that. How do we start to get, adults, let's focus on adults, to transition into starting to use those smaller muscles in the ankle? Because, that, like you said, closing the ankle puts you in a good place to do it. But we also see a tendency to brace against the outside ski. And now we're using major muscles, not the little fine tuning muscles. So how do we get adults to engage at that level rather than that abrasive level?
I think it's a good point, because it's a common thing, and maybe guests never get to that level. So if you do have a guest that you're ready to start to introduce this to, take some time with them and get them maybe out of their ski boots, and you can get them to use their ankle joint in full range of motion. Take them into a lodge and get that going and demonstrate what the ankle joint can do and how we can engage it. And one way that I was really able to open up my mind to using the ankle joint and getting it engaged, especially at the start of the turn, was when I broke my ankle in 2012. I really just flat landed a huge jump and landed flat on the ground, overshot the landing and broke my ankle. So I was in rehab, and the physio gave me a lot of good rehab drills to do. And one of the good ones for me that I really took away was if you grab a TheraBand, one of those stretchy bands, right? And then you can tie that or hold that around your foot and then start to make movements with your ankle joint. And for me, that helped build strength in the muscle that had gone away, and also it helped the ligaments that were mostly torn off of the bone. But it also built this awareness around my my tibialis anterior, and built some calf muscle strength back, and that inversion and E-version. So take a TheraBand with you before your lesson and play about with that. Give it to your guest at the end of the day and say, hey, this is your homework. You've got to do this 3 sets of 10, or until you get so tired that the muscle goes to failure, because that's going to happen a lot with people that are not used to this. And get them building awareness outside of the ski boot and outside of skiing, because then we can bring it back into skiing. It's very hard to make these fine movements whilst we're sliding on snow, right?
Yeah, and adding on to that, that is real kinesthetic awareness. That's part of it's not just strengthening the muscles, but it's making that connection between the brain and what it feels like when we're moving our foot. And I really kind of want to emphasize that's a key piece for us as instructors, is to point to that, regardless of if the student is more of a visual learner or auditory learner. Also highlighting the kinesthetic feeling. What does it feel like in your foot when you do this correctly? And so those stationary exercises are huge. Jack's, when you're shaking their ski tips, and that forces them to create that functional tension. If you can start to ask them, all right, where are you feeling that? What are you feeling? Okay, hold on to that memory of that feeling, and let's see if we can translate that to your actual skiing in there. So any of those drills, the chairlift one where you're lifting your foot, that's a time where you can say, okay, point to me where you're kind of feeling the muscle strain. Is it side your shin? Is it bottom of your foot? Things like that, are going to be key. So I think an adult, knows how to move their ankle, but they might not necessarily, spend a lot of time focusing on, what their ankle feels like, unless they, rolled their ankle and twisted it or injured it. But getting them to become aware of that, will play a huge role, so they can start to self-assess in their own skiing.
You guys mentioned this a little bit about, the boot and the buckles, like too tight or too loose. Do you want to expand on that a little bit and kind of maybe get into, boot fit, or how the foot bed can either affect balance or range of motion?
Yeah, I can take that one. Especially modern day boots that people are buying for recreation skiing, they're changing a lot, especially just over the last few years. And what I've seen is a lot of boots are having a lot less forward lean. So if this is the cuff and this is the bottom of the boot, our boots are more racy boots. They're going to have a strong forward lean there, a strong angle. A lot of the newer recreation boots are more upright. And the reason why they're doing that are the ski companies believe that guests want to ski upright because that's less fatiguing for guests, because they stack their skeletal joint. And as we know, it's not going to create that higher end skiing, and it's not going to break their skiing through to the next level with a ski boot like that. So watch out for that when you have your guests. Look at the natural forward lean of the boot, and you're not going to be able to do anything about that, right? We can definitely get the buckles tight. A good indicator that I've always done is just the width of an index finger is the maximum tightness between. You could either do that between the shin and the front of the boot, or the calf and the back of the boot. And then with regards to the footbeds are, I spent a lot of time in different types of footbeds, and I spent a long time without a footbed, zero footbed whatsoever in my skiing, and it didn't change my skiing a lot. But I have a pretty neutral foot. So what that means is I basically have a good natural pronation, and I maintain that in my turns, and my foot doesn't collapse because I have worked on creating those small muscles in the foot, making them strong for skiing especially, and I practice that when I'm out there running or cycling or whatever I'm doing. So play about with your footbed. I always like to have more of a softer footbed, so you can feel that inversion and E-version a little bit more rather than a super stiff footbed, because what can happen there is you can over invert the foot, and when you over invert, what can happen there is we lose that kinetic chain because the knees move too far inside of the ankle joint, and then you're not able to fire the stronger muscles. So yeah, go for play with it. Go without footbeds and see how it feels if you're not in too much pain, because it can be painful for some people. A softer footbed is better for me personally, and always a custom footbed, if you're going to get one, is definitely a good investment, and they last for years as well.
Yeah, and then on the equipment side of things, also ramp angle of the boot is going to play a role. What I mean by that is if the boot if the toes get a little bit higher when you're in the boot and the binding, or even a little bit lower, boots can be designed that way. A boot fitter might play around with that to help a person more naturally getting in a better position, but too extreme either way is going to inhibit that range of motion, both fore and aft wise, as well as rolling the ankles wise. So a boot off the shelf in most shops, like they're not going to be that extreme from the ramp angle or the binding, how the binding is designed, probably not going to be that extreme. There would be probably subtle differences, but aftermarket, you might see people out there, or you might get yourself in a position where it's your equipment ramp angle that's actually inhibiting your ability to make these movements in there. So that's definitely something worth taking a look at as well.
I think, Kelly, some female boots can have a high ramp angle on, and they lift the heel a lot. So be aware of that, ladies out there, that your boot doesn't have a strong ramp angle on the heel, which can make you over plantar flex and actually do the opposite effect and put you in that back seat on the calf as well.
I'm going to combine two questions. So when we're optimizing ankle flexion, and we're successful with it, how does that feel, or what type of feedback are we getting? And then does that change in different conditions, like groomed, steeper, powder, crud? Like, are there different things that we might want to look for when we're doing it well?
Yeah, that is a great question, and absolutely. So firm race course, groomed run, I can lever my tips more than ideal and usually still be okay, right? So I could err on the side of over flexing my ankles a little bit more in a way that I could not, obviously, like if I was skiing powder and my tips would dive in and bad things would happen in there. So definitely the intention of how you're skiing different terrain is going to change. A little bit more upright. Freestyle boots tend to be a little bit more upright than race boots. For that reason, because I want a lot of different, as much range of motion in my ankle as I can get. You know, even our mogul skiers, you know, they're definitely focused on flexing the ankles, but they need that really good range of motion to be able to absorb the moguls in that extreme way, as well as really quickly get from edge to edge in those very, very quick turns. So yeah, what sensations do we want to feel when we know we're doing it right? You know, I had brought up that, you know, feeling where the pressure is at the bottom of my foot, you know, along the length of my foot, you know, is a great indicator. That's, you know, again, that's something I've actively been trying to focus on. That, you know, pressure, you know, contact with the tongue of my boot, you know, is another key point in there. And that's, you know, that's me focusing on, you know, the fore and aft plane in there. And what about you, Jack?
Yeah, no, exactly that, Kelly. The middle of the foot, or, you know, getting super nitty gritty in terms of initiation at the front of the arch, and then, you know, shaping middle of the arch and completion towards the end. I wouldn't recommend that, because like Kelly says, you know, sometimes you just need to think forward, 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 just to stay in a centered position. But yeah, when I'm feeling in the zone in skiing, and it's high end, grippy snow, firm snow, I can play with that balance between the front of the arch and then the back of the arch. With regards to mogul skiing specifically, because I know you guys, you know, like to ski in the bumps, and a lot of people should find it a bit of a difficult thing, the moguls, when it's easier than what it needs to be. I think we overcomplicate the moguls. And for me, when I'm getting my tips over the backside of the bump, I'm not doing that through plantar flexion. I'm not opening up that ankle joint to get the tips down, because that would shoot me in the backseat too much. So the way that I do that, my feeling is I feel like my heels and the back of my skis are lifting up towards my butt. And that way I can still maintain that shin and cuff contact with the boot, but my ski tips have then matched the angle of the backside of the bump. Then I've got good ski snow contact, and I'm in an athletic stance. So bringing the heels up to the butt, you know, like I think we always used to call it like a donkey kick or something like that, in between, in that transition part of the turn. So Dolphin Turns, if you guys have ever done that in my training groups, we work a lot on Dolphin Turns to really feel the extremes, and that's basically leveraging off the back of the boot, getting the skis airborne, and then leveling out, and then landing with the tips, and then the tails last. So finding that, doing that extreme whilst maintaining, you know, good shin cuff contact, that's kind of, for me, the big cues in moguls.
Right, maybe one more question before we
I'll combine these two because they're kind of close. So you mentioned, you know, that tendency for those level 1, 2 candidates were over flexing and moving too far forward. So how does, you know, the flexion in the knee or the hip play in with ankle flexion? You know, like, can we, you know, if we're over flexed at the ankle, can we flex the knee a little bit more to bring us center? Maybe we're in a lower stance, or does flexing the knee and the hip have an effect on our ankle flexion?
Yes, and we like to, in our level 1 exams, we begin the day indoors and focusing on, you know, that connection and really what's happening, and particularly when we're talking about the fore and aft plane. What happens when I isolate the ankle flex? I flex my ankle, my center of mass moves forward. I open my ankle, my center of mass moves back. What happens when I isolate the knee? When I flex my knee, my center of mass moves back. When I extend my knee, my center of mass moves forward. What happens when I isolate the hip? When I flex my hip, the center of mass moves forward. When I extend my hip, the center of mass moves back. So it takes a second for the candidates to figure out how to only move one joint without moving all the other joints. But that is a great way to kind of figure out that understanding. And as a result, yes, the ankle, the knees, and the hips are going to be working together. We kind of cheat and say, well, the ankles, knees, and hips are flexing proportionally. When we mean like, yeah, that's a good picture where the center of mass is staying over the feet, even though we're flexing down. But to that point, we look at the mogul skiers. We can only flex our ankles so much in a ski boot, but we can really, 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 really flex our knees a lot. And as a result, the hip then has to play that kind of corrector as a result. So, but if we can make sure that the ankle is flexed properly and we're not over flexing the knee, then we can stay, keep our center of mass over our feet a little bit better. And that, I see that a lot, particularly when we're, maybe skiing crud, that students might over flex their knees more in order to kind of feel comfortable, get a little bit lower. Yeah. But that's going to prevent them from being, in a good position, even though their ankles are flexed. So, having that right amount of, keep the ankle flexed, having the right amount of knee flex depending on the needs, and then that hip kind of plays that kind of last piece of, correcting so that the center of mass can be in that correct spot.
Here's the way I see it as a general rule of thumb is most people do not ski with enough hip flex. And when we go and take level 1 exams, that lack of hip flex in combination with a lack of ankle flex and potentially some overflex knees as well, we see more of a stance in the back of the ski, stance towards the back of the ski. So level 1 candidates, we see, yeah, definitely not enough ankle flex and not enough hip flex, probably sometimes too much knee flex. By the time the level 2 exam comes up, we see that to get the performance closer to that level 2 type of performance, we see the candidates come in with a more centered stance, but still not enough hip flex. And again, this is just a rule of thumb, just anecdotally from generalizations. And to get to a more centered position, we see the candidates flexing their ankle joint a bit more than what's needed, especially through the middle and end of the turn to stay centered. But then that creates all sorts of ski performance problems. So yeah, go with that hip flex, like Kelly said. The hip flex can send our center of mass forward when done correctly, and then we don't have to leverage that boot to maintain centered between the middle and the end of the turn, creating that down stem.
Yeah, and kind of what is the correct angle for that ankle flex and that hip? I like to think of it as kind of my reference alignment being those 2 parallel lines. If my shin is one line and my spine is another line, and I'm looking at myself in this case, or the student from the side, those 2 lines are parallel. Is a great indicator that the ankle flex and the hip flex are in that correct proportional amount. To Jack's point, that image of the student, maybe having some ankle flex, but having, the hip is too much open and the spine is very upright. Suddenly we have two different lines and not being parallel. Great. So yeah, thank you guys for those questions and your attention this whole time. I want to thank Ryan for helping facilitate and kind of run the show from behind the scenes. And then lastly, before we sign out, wanted to give a shout out to the PSIA Western Division Educational Foundation. This is our education fund. Excuse me. This is a fund that supports the creation of educational materials for us, the members, as well as provide scholarships to events that are highly very valuable and well received from the recipients. And so definitely want to make sure everybody's aware of the education fund, and I definitely want to encourage you to donate so that we can continue to build the educational offerings, like these webinar series that we've started this off season, as well as keep those scholarships nice and robust, so that everybody who wants to take a new exam or go to convention has that opportunity to do that.
Yes, thank you guys very much for doing this. Appreciate the time and effort that you put into it. I think it's for me, it's always been a fun topic, because I feel like we're, what is a good place to be on the foot, and sometimes in PSIA that heel is a dirty word. But I think you guys answered a lot of really good questions and lined things up. So thank you very much for your time and effort and just diving into the ankle. That was amazing. We are going to continue to do these. PSIA Western will be hosting another one next July, or this coming July, next month, to be determined. And there has been a couple of questions that have popped up. This has been recorded. I know there was some people that were not able to get into this evening, so we will be posting this for those of you that were unable to view this. So yes, this has been recorded, and you will be able to watch it again. And like Kelly said, PSIA-W, the Education Foundation, if $1 is great. So yeah, whatever you can do, we appreciate it, and it helps us continue to support these. And if you guys have any other topics or hot topics that you would love for us to jump into over this media platform, please share those with us. We're always looking for ideas, but we are going to continue this on a monthly basis. So again, Jack, Kelly, thank you for your time and effort. It was amazing. And thank you everybody for listening and engaging. Much appreciated.
Yes, thank you guys.
Thank you. Thanks everyone.